our
Yes.
participants.
We have around 67 already, and it's increasing.
Yes.
So we can welcome the participants as well as the speakers. Welcome everyone to the fourth session of Masterclass series.
Welcome everybody, and thank you very much for having us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you too. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you for your participation. And I do hope that you and all your families are safe and in good health wherever you are. I would like to say from west to east, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I did say this, the opposite actually last week, I later noticed. And of course, it was not because the world turning to the other way around, but it was just a slip of tongue. I do apologize for that. And I do apologize for any other mistake that I didn't notice so far, and any other mistakes that we are going to do during the master classes. And I would like to thank you again for your participation. Today, we are going to have really excellent presentations again. One from ICC by Mr. Crispin Conroy. The other one is going to be from GIZ with Stefan Felix and Belace Fikre. And the last one from Andreas Dresder from FDI Center. And I would like to do, as usual, some very little reminders. Please do make sure that you muted your microphones. And please do not hesitate to use the Zoom chat box function for your questions. You can ask your questions later, the discussions actually, and you may continue interacting under the Zoom chat box function. And we are recording this masterclass as usual, and you can reach out under eCampus. Carl?
Thank you very much, Ismail, and also good day to everybody on behalf of the ILO and the ITC ILO here coming from Turin, Italy. I'm also very happy to see so many people are tuning in. Now we're close to 90 already, 85, 86, so that's good. Exactly, Ismail, from east to west, not west to east.
Exactly.
And that's the good thing, if you have more than one edition of this masterclass, we can learn from our mistakes.
My geography teacher can rest in peace now.
Exactly. Very good. Let's look at the agenda of today. Like always, we want to wrap up, close this webinar within the next 2 hours. We're mindful indeed of that. For many of you, the day is just starting, especially coming from the southern hemisphere. Southern, yes. It's correct.
Correct. Go ahead.
Yes, the southern hemisphere. Let's look at the agenda of today. Well, this masterclass is resonating some of the messages that came from the other masterclasses, and that was the issues of partnership. The IPA, the Investment Promotion Agency, as part of a wider ecosystem, which is required, IPA is required to link up with public authorities, private entities, and so forth. I remember we discussed this in previous sessions, how an IPA can link up with academia, business organizations, and there is this need even today more than ever for strategic engagement and partnership to achieve your mandate as an investment promotion agency. This came out very clear from the sessions that we had with UNIDO, with UNCTAD, and also the sessions we had with ILO and Chile Invest, if you all remember very well. It was also raised very much when we were discussing the issues of discussing business linkages, working together with business organizations, with employers organizations, with chambers of commerce, but also technical cooperation agencies. And that is that's also the people, the persons that we invited for today. Our keynote speakers in this masterclass are Mr. Crispin Conroy from the International Chamber of Commerce, GIZ, Mr. Stefan Felix and Mr. Belaciu Fekre, and Mr. Andreas Dresler from the FDI Center. And what they will provide to us is mainly this private sector perspective, the interests and needs of the private sector and investors. At the end of the session, we will also provide you with the assignment or the discussion guide for Masterclass 4. and then also the invitation for what will be already the final masterclass. And the good news is we have the agenda almost ready for this fifth masterclass. Remember that this fifth masterclass was going to be is going to consist of mainly investment promotion agencies, but more about that later. Let us look at, this is for those that are, because some of, I think there were the final participants registered earlier this week. This is, like said, the fourth masterclass, and next week, Wednesday, we will have the final masterclass on best practices with IPAs. Let's look at the discussion forum, and I am very happy that you continue to contribute to the discussions on the different discussion forums on the different topics. I still see you posting under Masterclass 1, Masterclass 2, so that is very interesting, and I hope you are really picking up some ideas and are establishing some relationships. I went in the past days, I went through the new posts that were posted, and I just selected a few of them that I thought that caught at least my attention. And I would like to see if I can get Bonaventura from Namibia online. Bonaventura, are you there?
Yes, Carl, good afternoon to you, to Ismail, to the entire class, everybody present, good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be on board.
Thank you, Bonaventura. Hey,
Thank
Bonaventura, thanks for your very active participation on the forum. I just wanted to have a follow-up question. Could you tell us a little bit more about the draft Namibia Investment Promotion Act, and how do you see that working in the future?
Okay, now this specific intervention, as you would know, I'm based here in Paris, France as a commercial counselor. So my colleague, Angela Dow Pretorius, she deals with the Investment Promotion Act. And this post was in fact done by her from headquarters. So if I can use this opportunity to maybe call upon her so that she can elaborate on this, because she is working on the Investment Promotion Act. Thank you so much. Angela, you want to come in, please?
Is she online?
In case she has not, I can quickly give her a call and you can proceed with another participant, of which we can then come back, because this is something specifically that she is.
No problem at all.
Yeah.
No problem at all. Let's go maybe to Chile, to Alejandro. Alejandro, are you with us?
Yes. Hello, Carl. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Fine too. Thank you.
Alejandro, you had a very interesting post. Can you elaborate a few minutes more on this?
Yes, of course. Although the concern of making a registry of local suppliers has existed for a long time, it has not been possible to materialize in a project. The idea was to start with a registry of real estate, accounting, and legal services, then expand the registry to more specialized ventures. In fact, we would like to be able to connect the highly scalable undertakings of our development bank with foreign companies. This could be a breakthrough and perhaps an important niche development niche for Chilean entrepreneurs. One of the main challenges has been to address the public role of Invest Chile. How do we recommend one local company over another with objective information? You can say. But in the event that there is a problem between the foreign company and the local business, how do we respond to that situation? These are the main questions that are here repeatedly when talking about this topic. Another possible solution is to develop an open registry without any kind of selection, where Invest Chile only provides the digital space for local suppliers to register their company. In this way, foreign companies could evaluate and score local companies so that the registry shows which companies are better than others. It is difficult to act freely when the IPA belongs to the state regime. I know of cases that are of mixed administration or 100% private, where they have less bureaucracy to deal with. It does not only happen with the registry of local suppliers, it's also happened with the recommendation of certain projects, or in particular to connect investors specifically. As a state, we cannot benefit a particular company over others, which is why sometimes the work is difficult.
Yeah. Thank you, Alejandro. I like this post because it raises a lot of practical questions. How do you do it indeed? What is the role of the IPA in stimulating this business linkages? What are criteria to recommend or don't recommend certain companies? So if you have an answer for Alejandro or specific recommendations on how to resolve this situation, please do so. Your post is linked, I believe, on the masterclass 3. I do
Yes.
not have immediately an answer for you, but I believe there will be sufficient experiences maybe in the room to deal with this specific dilemma. How do you do that actually? Because you as such cannot be held responsible if something goes wrong in that linkaging of one company with another. So I liked a lot this intervention. Maybe Janina, are you with us also?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm fine. Good morning, everyone. Here in Brazil, we are starting the day, as you said.
Exactly. Also very interesting part about the measuring of jobs. Can you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, so I work at Apex Brazil. We are the federal promotion agency for investments and exports. And until very recently, we just measured the amount of investments and the number of investments we helped to create here in Brazil. So approximately last year, we started worrying about the number of jobs we are helping to create in Brazil through attracting FDI. But we are facing some challenges regarding how to measure this, because it's a self-given information. So we have to rely on the investor information. We are still working on the KPIs to measure how much jobs are really created. And we believe it's an important measure because with everything that is happening in Brazil in the last month, specifically regarding the pandemic context, unemployment has been rising, and creating jobs is a very important feature of an IPA. So we started with this very recently, and we are happy to hear from others IPAs how they measure their impacts regarding the SDGs, regarding creating jobs, and how they track their good impact in their countries.
Yeah. Thank you, Janina. Of course, here it's a post that I wanted to highlight. If you have a specific suggestion here, it's also coming in from the third masterclass. Please feel free to post it in there, and then we can even report back on it next week. So thanks a lot for that one, Janina. Let's maybe go to Naleli. Naleli, that is Mexico, I believe, huh?
Yes, thank you very much, Carl. So I work for Grupo Prodensa. Here in Mexico, I think it was 2 years ago, where the president, he disappeared the official IPA of Mexico, which was Pro Mexico. And only the states, they have the investment promotion offices, and now they are becoming IPAs. Some of my colleagues from Mexico are here right now in the course, but companies like us, which are considered shelters, we became like one of the main promoters of Mexico, and we attract foreign investment because we provide services very similar to an IPA. We provide site selection services, feasibility studies, market analysis, and then once the company decides to establish in Mexico, we help them with the permits, recruitment, and as we are a very big company, we have like 600 employees. We are able to provide outsourcing services during the first year or 2 years of the company here in Mexico, while they learn how to do business here in Mexico, and then they decide to go on their own, and then we provide like aftercare services. so they can continue in compliance here in Mexico. That was just a brief introduction of us and why we are like an investment promotion agency, but we are a company. So some of the things that we do to promote decent work. So during the site selection process, we use the average salaries of the areas, and we always promote that the salary has to be competitive and according to the market. And then when we do the feasibility study, so the foreign company, sometimes people think that, well, Mexico is very competitive, but sometimes it is not for your project. So that's why we provide the feasibility study. We're very neutral in that. So in those studies, we put salaries above the average, because if you have salaries equal to or below, the rotation can be up to 5% depending on the area. And then for union members here in Mexico, it's not an issue, but it is important to consider the union workers. We use the category system, and so to be exceeded as long as the employees meet the company's objectives. It starts with an initial salary that we as Prudenza negotiate with the company that could be equal or higher than the market average for recruitment, and it also helps us to have a flow of personnel. After 3 months, these union workers they can have an increase in salary, and then after 6, after 9, and we have even helped the company to develop these union workers to become technical engineers or technical inside of the facility. We always, as we are the outsourcing, we take over the HR department of our clients. We need to assure full compliance. So our practices need to be on top, and we always guarantee that the salary will increase once a year. We have developed also, this is a new service that we're about to launch, which is employer of choice. That's a service we're going to launch in all over Mexico, because we have offices in all over Mexico. And we have developed a methodology in which we are promoting that the company does not only pay good wages, but also that they create a sense of belonging, and that the reputation of the company by the people could be good. And also, well, everything starts inside of the company with the Prudenza way or the Prudenza culture. We need, as a company, be an example to all of our clients or the foreign companies that are coming to Mexico or we are supporting. And for the past 10 years, we have been awarded as a great place to work in Mexico. We're inside of the top 100 companies in terms of inclusion and diversity, a best place to work for millennials, the places everyone wants to work, and we are very committed to become a best place to work. And also our HR director, he was recently named as one of the HR influencers in all over Mexico. So I think before giving an advice, we need to become, as a company, a reference, and I think that has been a very successful formula for us.
Thank you, Naleli from Prudenza in Mexico. And I'm handing over now to Ismail.
Thank you very much, Carl. And thank you for the contributions to Bonaventura, Naleli, and Janaina, as well as Alejandro. Now I would like to switch to ICC, to our first speaker, and I would like to thank to him specially as well. I do know that he's a bit sick. And
sorry, Ismail.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry, Ismail. Angela is now on board. So
okay,
if you maybe want to revisit that. Thank you.
We would be happy to listen from her. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Angela, can you hear us?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Angela. We are listening to you.
Yes, I was, my apology to everyone. I was busy with another webinar, so
No problem
it
at all.
seems to be, yeah, a bit pressured. I've been joining now. Bona did not exactly brief me.
Maybe post the question
yeah.
again to her.
Yes, just post the question again so I can respond to it.
Hi, Angela. We were just talking about the Namibia Investment Promotion Act.
Yes.
And if you could just like 1 or 2 minutes elaborate on this.
Okay. Well, the Namibia Investment Promotion Act, which is basically in its final draft form, we have considered to review what we originally had, the Foreign Direct Investment Act, basically because we believe that the previous act was outdated, and we felt that we needed a new approach to investment policy, which included to have a well-balanced law of the rights and obligation of the rights of investors, as well as having obligations for investors, and the government to actually have a right to regulate, to achieve the sustainable development goals that we have yes, considered for our country. So to have that balance within the new law. So what has happened is that we have introduced, for example, performance agreements for investors above a certain threshold. We have in our regulations certain sectors where we feel that we should maintain only for local or domestic entrepreneurs, because we would like them to grow in those sectors. And then we have other sectors we have identified for joint venture cooperation, and we have other sectors where we feel that definitely we can receive foreign investors above a certain threshold, and then generally sectors that are open to investment. What we also included is that we consider now investors, I believe it was discussed in the previous masterclass, not quantity investment, but quality investment. So we introduced what we call net benefit criteria. I believe I mentioned in our question there a few of the attributes that we consider. Yes, that we actually attract investments that really benefit our economy, that contribute to industrial development and economic growth in general.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you very much. And for those, I wanted to highlight this post because it's really developed this policy framework where you want to see how you can maximize the positive impact of investment, like you said, the rights and obligations, but also the responsibility of investors. Thank you very much, Angela. Sorry for putting you on the spot like this.
No problem.
Thank you.
Ismail, thank you very much. Ismail, please.
Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Bonaventuran. And I would like to switch slowly to our speakers. What I was saying, ICC, International Chamber of Commerce, is one of our consultative committee members. The reason why it's so important and our partnership is so important with ICC, you do all know the importance that we place to the collaboration with the private sector. Actually, private sector and companies are the reasons why investment promotion agencies exist. Actually, this is why we exist. This is, we all exist to serve companies, actually. Today, we are going to have the chance to listen business priorities from Crispin Conroy. He's a very beloved friend of mine, and I would like to thank to him as well because of his sacrifice. I do know that he got a bit cold. He's not very well. He feels a bit ill, but despite all those things, he had the time to join us today. And we do look forward to listen from you, Crispin. And Crispin is, of course, is the permanent observer of the ICC to the United Nations office in Geneva. And he has been working for the Australian IPA in the past. He has a vast experience in the area. Therefore, we look forward to learn from you, Crispin. Thank you very much again for participating. Please, welcome to the floor.
Thank you very much, Ismail, and also Carl. And apologies really, because the problem is not that I'm feeling unwell, but the problem is that I may lose my voice or start sneezing. So forgive me if I go off camera a bit and have to blow my nose or get some water.
We hear you very clearly now. I hope you'll get well soon.
Good. I'm not usually speaking like this. And thank you to everyone who sent messages through the chat. I really appreciate it. Yes, look, thank you. It's very important, as you mentioned, Ismail, the relationship that ICC is developing with WIPA. And this is for the participants to know, it's one of the first events that we've done together, although we know each other well as organizations. So we really are building a partnership, not just with events like this, but in other forums, and I'll discuss that a little bit later. My first regret is that I'm not with you, Carl, in Torino, because it's actually one of my favorite cities in the world. I went there first when I was 18, and been back nearly every year since. So I certainly look forward to visiting you sometime in the future. Also, my presentation, as you'll see from the title, is really much more focused on our trade priorities at the moment as we're dealing with COVID-19 and then hopefully moving forward to an economic recovery. And I discussed this with Ismail, and I'm certainly conscious of the fact that as IPAs and people who are working in investment, trade is not maybe your main focus, but I thought it would be very interesting to see where we're coming from, as we expect, obviously, trade to be driving a recovery and also kickstarting, hopefully, FDI flows. So let me begin with just a few comments about ICC itself. And I do that really because, thank you, Carl, because many people don't know ICC. I certainly didn't before I joined it. Some people think of the International Cricket Council, if you're from my part of the world, or the International Criminal Court. But ICC is the largest business organization and the institutional representative of over 45 million companies in over 100 countries and employing more than 1 billion workers. So it's a network of significant reach, and I think obviously one that IPAs and WIPA as the representative should be tapping into, and we should be tapping into relationships with you. So another reason why we're thrilled to be working with WIPA. I wanted to focus on our history for a moment because in addition to its global network, ICC is unique in that we have a founding mission for business worldwide to work for peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. So we're not really a chamber of commerce in that true sense of the word, where we introduce business people to other business people. We're more a body that deals at international, national, and regional level to develop policy, standards, and frameworks. So I think that's particularly important to underline given the topic today of collaboration and partnerships. The notion of ICC's larger purpose was integral to our creation in the aftermath of the First World War. As you'll be aware, there was a Paris Peace Conference which governments attended. In parallel, business people attended a separate meeting to see how they could contribute to the rebuilding and recovery of the world after that terrible tragedy, which was the First World War. And our founders had the belief that creating strong commercial ties between nations would reduce the need for troops to accompany goods across borders and thereby lead to more peaceful relations and greater prosperity. So let me focus a little bit on COVID-19 and what are other major business concerns within the international trading system, how we're responding, and then how we're looking to work with WIPA and others to promote better engagement around investment issues. So firstly, I think it's worth noting that business has shown great ingenuity and speed in adapting to COVID-related trade and investment disruptions and distortions. However, unfortunately, the private sector's agility has too often been in spite of, rather than being aided by government interventions. I'll focus my remarks today on the international trading system, as this has been our main focus, as I said before, but I'll be happy to follow up with any investment-specific questions, either in question time or separately through email. And certainly some of the posts that were discussed earlier are great interest to me, given my background with Austrade, the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. The issues, for example, that Alejandro mentioned around due diligence. I was based in Chile as ambassador first and then senior trade and investment commissioner. And also the KPI issue that Janina mentioned, obviously a tricky one. Having said this, and before I discuss our priorities, it is clear that the pandemic has impacted globalization in many ways that are of concerns to both governments and businesses, including disruptions to trade and to the flows of foreign direct investment. According to an UNCTAD study, which you're probably aware of, for example, global FDI flows are likely to contract between 30 to 40% in the 2021 period. And this will affect most severely developing countries. And in this context, the IMF reported that foreign investors had withdrawn over $80 billion from developing countries since the start of the crisis. And this amounts to the largest outflow of capital ever recorded. And I'll come back to that later. Now, to move on to the international trading system, ICC believes that the real black swan or surprising thing was not the virus itself, but really the lack of an effective global cooperative response. Countries have tended to adopt sovereign measures that make sense individually, but not when viewed through a global lens. Policies like export bans on PPE, medicines and food, and now measures that are being talked about to reshore production and to meddle with extremely complex supply chains, all complicate the health response and have the potential to both prolong the pandemic and to delay an economic recovery. Some economic multilateral organizations like the World Trade Organization, or WTO, have shown little agility in their response. Others, like the World Health Organization, the WHO, have come under sustained political attack while being underfunded and clearly not designed to handle situations like this. Also, once effective groupings like the G20, the 20 largest economies, have shown little unity or have enacted measures without any real teeth. In short, never has the need for international cooperation been greater and its absence starker. The WTO, which is a key institution for business, has been under enormous strain even before COVID-19. We've long known about the challenges. They've had few breakthroughs in over 20 years. There have been new forms of protectionism emerging with increasing frequency, and there is now a disabled dispute settlement system. And of course, geopolitical rivalry between the US and China has politicized trade and investment in a way not seen for decades. And you will have seen in the press today that a WTO panel between the US and China is likely to even cause more friction. The US lost that panel. So on the one hand, the prospects for the WTO look grim. It really is under existential threat. And it remains unclear whether the US wants to mortally wound the WTO or to use maximum leverage to drive the reforms it wants to see. In any case, we believe that much will hinge on the outcome of the US election, what kind of long-term trade policy posture Europe ultimately adopts, and whether the major powers, US, for example, China, India, Europe, and others in the African continent and throughout Latin America, are able to come finally to an understanding of what a new vision for the WTO should be. And also they're in the process of selecting a new Director General. So whoever he or she might be will also be crucial. On the other hand, we believe there is now more than ever a window for reform. There is a consensus on the need for reform, and with COVID-19, there's an urgency to really reboot the WTO and make it relevant for 21st century economies and for business. Looking ahead, I mentioned already the selection of the new Director General, but also some of the joint statement initiatives that are taking place within the WTO, which are plurilateral, not multilateral in nature, also offer some hope for the future. And in the context of your work, the joint statement initiative on investment facilitation for development is a really crucial initiative. And certainly we'll be working with Ishmael and our friends in WIPA to ensure that there is a business perspective to those discussions. So now we believe really could be the opportunity to shift discussion from the future of the WTO to the urgency of designing the WTO for the future. But much will be up to us, to business, engaging in these conversations and engaging with our colleagues in governments and telling them really how the system should look like if it is to serve business as the ultimate end user of the trading system. Let me touch briefly also on supply chain resilience. This is important, I think, also in the context of recovery. Thank you again, Carl. We're seeing a major disconnect between policy discussions about supply chain disruptions and the on-the-ground reality. No doubt, international supply chains have become more complex. In the early stages of the pandemic, logistics were severely disrupted with supply and demand dynamics constantly shifting as borders and markets opened and closed in an asynchronous manner, and customers rapidly changed their consumption patterns, increasingly embracing e-commerce. Many companies had to adjust and are continuing to thoughtfully examine how they might restructure supply chains to allow for greater resiliency to external shocks and to deal with the new COVID reality. At the same time, however, the bigger and largely unreported story is that the private sector showed extraordinary ingenuity in responding to these challenges. For example, it was remarkable how resilient global supply chains did prove in the face of the shock, given the magnitude of what we've been seeing. It didn't take long, for example, for some perfume companies and alcohol manufacturers to produce hand sanitizers. Other companies were making face masks and hotels becoming quarantine centers, for example. But the global policy discussion is disconnected from this reality. Now we believe the greater threat to global supply chains is actually from increasing government scrutiny that in many instances often appears to be little more than a pretext for protectionism. And this will impact trade and investment, especially as we move to a recovery phase. Rather than creating resilience, the next natural disaster or homegrown crisis could wipe out whole industries. I'd like also, just before moving on to quickly to WTO reform, to note that it is really too early to say what shape a global recovery will be, although there have been some encouraging signs in some larger markets. In the context of investment, as a recent WEF study noted, in spite of these encouraging signs, due to the nature of FDI, we should be prepared for a slow recovery. That report continues, in many instances, cross-border business ties need to be re-established, investors are normally more risk-averse abroad than at home, and there are a number of complicated operations and logistics challenges involved in restarting production in a foreign country. We believe all the more reason why we need to get trade moving and remove some of those protectionist measures that I'd referred to previously. And quickly on WTO reform, something that I work on a lot here in Geneva. And it's important, I believe, to mention because we all need to try and get, whether we work for governments or the private sector, to get the WTO functioning as one of the key multilateral institutions capable of driving a recovery. As I mentioned before, we're very concerned that temporary trade restrictions may become entrenched. Government responses to COVID-19 in some cases have involved erecting new forms of trade barriers. And some of these were necessary to protect jobs and keep economies afloat. but there is a risk of economically unsound policies becoming entrenched. Massive subsidies programs, more so-called strategic approaches to trade and investment, and export restrictions on medical supplies and essential foodstuffs all risk becoming a standard feature of the trading system. I mentioned the G20 earlier. In late March, they agreed that emergency measures designed to tackle COVID-19, if deemed necessary, must be targeted, proportionate, transparent, and temporary. We believe all of those words are necessary to follow through on. COVID-19 has exposed the fragility of our international cooperation, and the WTO clearly needs to do more, as we all do, to support global responses to this crisis and to the recovery. Thanks, Carl. Next slide. I also wanted to touch briefly also on trade finance, because that's another area where I think we mixed, no, that's it, thanks, where we believe could be a potential hiccup in terms of a recovery or an obstacle. Shortages of trade finance were frequently cited as the major barrier to SMEs entering global markets even before the pandemic. But we're now entering entirely new territory, and we're concerned about the impact this might have on a recovery, both in terms of cross-border trade and foreign investment flows. While there is not yet a crisis in the trade finance market, with global trade flows depressed, available market data seems to suggest that there are indeed emerging stresses in the market. Moreover, growing uncertainty in the global economy could create the perfect storm for widespread retrenchment in the global trade credit market in the coming months. In other words, as the recovery starts, businesses will need to find more credit and more trade finance to invest and to trade, but we believe there may not be sufficient funds around. In addition to concerns about a looming wave of corporate insolvencies, a number of recent IMF studies point to growing sovereign risks from a credit perspective, with the fiscal position of a large number of emerging economies looking increasingly precarious. In this context, we fear that policymakers have not properly assessed what will happen once the demand for trade returns to a semblance of normality, or if the supply side sentiment deteriorates further. Current signals and historic precedent suggest it is extremely unlikely that commercial banks and insurers will have sufficient risk appetite to supply the credit needed to restore trade levels to 2019 levels, which, according to one scenario we recently modeled, could require up to $5 trillion to come back into the trade market in 2021. However, wrongly, many institutions around the world seem to believe that measures taken to scale up public support schemes, equivalent to an estimated 50 billion US compared to the 5 trillion we've estimated as a possible requirement. So in the early days of the crisis, will clearly be insufficient to adequately support the supply of trade finance through the response and recovery. So simply what's being put aside is not enough, we believe. In the short term, we see the need of a scaling up of public guarantee schemes for trade finance, whereby governments and/or development banks cover a portion of the credit risk in any transaction, together with regulatory reforms to unlock capital to support trade and investment. Just before concluding, let me touch on the cooperation between ICC and WIPA that I mentioned in my introduction. We at ICC are certainly looking forward to increasing that collaboration. As institutions, we certainly know each other well, but following a recent discussion between our two leaders, we've agreed to find ways to engage with each other more closely. Our strategy is built around the enhancement of collaboration between companies and IPAs, which can only be a win-win outcome for both sides. You'll recall that I said at the beginning of my presentation that our network covers over 45 million companies with national committees made up of businesses in over 100 countries. So clearly it's a network that is widespread and deep, and deeper engagement with national IPAs could be, I think, a great opportunity for us both. So the short-term agenda really is to expand in each other's activities, including events like this one, and also in the work of the World Trade Organization Joint Stated Initiative on Investment Facilitation for Development, which I mentioned earlier on. And ICC and WIPA will join a World Economic Forum panel on this issue next week. It's very important that we get in the views of, I guess, what you can call the clients in those discussions. We're also looking at doing events together in certain regions, starting off with our national action group in Africa. And Ismail, you mentioned at the beginning, we're also sort of a medium to long-term project will be participation of ICC and some of our leading member companies in the WIPA advisory board. And again, the objective there is to make sure that the views of the clients, particularly some of the bigger ones and the companies we're targeting, will be at the forefront of your thoughts. Ishmael asked me actually to mention a couple of examples from my own background with the Australian government, both in terms of inwards and outwards investment. Maybe in terms of time, I don't have enough time, but I'm certainly very happy to do that in the future. As I mentioned earlier, some of the questions that were raised at the beginning or the posts really reminded me of the work I did in Latin America. I was Australian ambassador in Chile for 5 years, and then also concurrently ambassador in Bolivia, Ecuador, Colombia, and Peru. And a large part of my work was working with Australian companies looking to, not to trade, as you can imagine. Australia and many countries in Latin America produce similar sorts of things. So it wasn't about trade, it was about investment. And I worked very closely with a number of IPAs in that region. And I'm very pleased to see on the supporters of this particular activity, ProColombia, an excellent relationship with them, working with Australian investors. I also worked most recently before joining ICC in Milan in Italy as the Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner for Australia and Italy. And I guess I was on the other side of the fence then. I was trying to attract Italian investment into Australia, into strategic parts of the Australian economy where we needed a boost, let's put it that way, whether it was renewable energy or agri-food or tourism. So, I certainly had some very interesting experiences and some learnings which I'd be very pleased to share, and consider some other experiences of people who are participating in this group. I think that having an IPA in your country is a great start, but the strategic focus on specific sectors where the economy needs outside, not just funds, but expertise is crucial. And I think also just thinking of the KPIs, and it's that sort of, not just the here you go into the economy and then ciao, we never see each other again. It's that sort of aftercare service, which is also extremely helpful to make sure that the investment's going well, and also to decide really whether it has been a productive foreign investment producing those sorts of jobs that we might have been expecting. So look forward to sharing those experiences and others in another event, Carl, and Ishmael, if you'll have me. Just by way of conclusion, I've highlighted a number of areas of concern to ICC and our business members, and I apologize again if it's a bit very trade focused on organizations like the WTO, but I think it's important to share with you how business sees the recovery starting, and that recovery through trade will then kickstart hopefully the investment flows as well. I mentioned earlier about the consequences of a global contraction in FDI on developing countries, and certainly we understand that the consequences could be severe and affect different countries in different ways. And there are a number of ways that policy efforts could be used to mitigate against the negative impacts of FDI contraction, particularly for the most affected, often the least developed countries. One that ICC has been exploring with the International Trade Union Council and Global Citizen. So, an interesting partnership between business the unions and civil society with the support of the financial institutions in the US, so the World Bank, for example, is the importance of significant debt relief to the worst affected countries, which that would then, of course, allow these countries to free up much needed funds for more urgent needs. I would encourage you to look at the ICC website for further information on this, and also some of the other issues that we've been focusing on, of course, particularly during COVID-19 and our Save Our SMEs campaign, for example, but also many others. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm very happy to be contacted directly on issues related to ICC and our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Crispin, for your excellent presentation. That was very comprehensive. And I do believe that the story starts with the trade, actually. Therefore, it's very important to listen to your perspective as well. Trade and investment are very much interlinked to each other. We see that many companies they tend to start their relations with countries by trade, and they proceed with the investments. I do want to thank you again for your participation. And there is one question from the audience. If I do know that you're not going to be able to participate to the Q&A session, if you still have time for 1 or 2 minutes, I would like to bring this question to your attention. This is about more like small businesses, actually, who do not have access to the big international organizations. And they do say that how could they, the question is coming from Jawad Said. And the question is, how can we make sure that the policy follows their needs, especially the companies who do not, these small companies who do not have access to these big international organizations? Do you have any, let's say, studies on that? Could you please elaborate a little bit?
Well, I won't refer to a study, but I'll refer to our practice in the past few months. As I mentioned, I'm relatively new to ICC. I've been in the Australian government for a long time, but and I'm still learning about ICC. But certainly, I can say, and you can see it on the screen here, the last slide, that ICC, unlike some of the other business organisations that are perhaps more well known internationally, like WEF or the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, which are wonderful organizations, but they have a very specific support group of, I think WEF has about 600 companies and World Business Council about 200, and their companies are all very, very focused already on SDGs and often larger companies. ICC does, through our network of national committees and our relationship with World Chambers Federation, we refer to ourselves as the representative of the real economy, so not of those top elite companies, although we have members of all size. In the WTO, they refer to them as MSMEs, MSMEs, so not SMEs, but micro, small, medium-sized enterprises. So we've been equally active, I'd say even more active, around issues related to SMEs or MSMEs throughout this crisis. Have a quick look at our Save Our SMEs platform. The objective is to try and help micro, small and medium-sized enterprises in a range of issues, particularly focused to the crisis, but not just the crisis. And we also, that contains a number of links to other organizations that we're partnering with, like the different ITC, the ITC in Geneva, which is part of UNCTAD and WTO. They have a special focus on MSMEs, and we've just, for example, I've been engaged in a report with them on MSMEs and women entrepreneurs. So have a quick look at the website. And certainly MSMEs, significant focus of ICC's work generally, but also specifically during COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Crispin. There are other questions as well, I'm sure, but I'm not going to keep you too long. I'm going to give the floor to the other colleagues as well. I would like to thank you again very much. I would like to say again that we are also very much excited as WIPA to work together with ICC and to let our members to reach out your vast, let's say, network of companies. You told about 45 million companies in more than 100 countries. We look forward to working together, especially for the Business Advisory Committee. We do want to listen from the companies as more as we can, because we want to serve them better, and we want to increase the percentage of companies working with the IPAs to a higher percentage from 30s to maybe 50s at the initial point, maybe even further later on. Thank you very much again for your participation.
I apologize that I'm leaving now, both to the participants and to my fellow panelists, but as you can hear, I'm starting to lose my voice. And
I think it was perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time. Now I'm handing over the floor slowly to GIZ. We have two colleagues from GIZ together with us, Mr. Stefan Felix and Mr. Belache Fikre. Stefan Felix is the advisor for the private sector development at GIZ, and Belache Fikre is head of business and investment component. You may have watched their videos earlier today. We put this at the eCampus. Actually, they are doing amazing job. They have a huge team and they are active all around the world. We are wondering what you are doing on international collaboration and how do you work with the investment promotion agencies? Stefan, welcome on board.
Thank you very much. So I hope you can hear me well, and I also hope that you can all see the screen and the presentation that I'm sharing.
Yes, we hear you perfectly and we see the presentation perfectly as well.
Perfect.
The floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation, and hello to everyone all around the world. It's really interesting to see the sort of very diverse group of participants that are joining us today. I'm Stefan Felix. I'm with GIZ, German International Corporation. I'll say a couple of words about GIZ in a second. I'm a private sector development advisor, and I'm here today with my colleague Belache, as Ismail has already pointed out. What I want to talk about a little bit is, this session is about international collaboration. So in my first two agenda items that you can see here, I want to talk about a little bit about cooperation between GIZ and investment promotion agencies. And I think for you, it's relevant because I think you can see that as a case study of how technical assistance providers such as GIZ can work with investment promotion agencies. So I think see that as a case study for that. I'll then hand over to Belache, who will talk specifically about our cooperation with the Ethiopian investment promotion agencies, just to, to get you a little bit of a better feeling around what it is exactly that we're actually doing on the ground. After that, I'll get a little bit more sort of general, because I was asked to also cover the issue of generally, how can investment promotion agencies partner up with international organizations, chambers, and other partners, and how EIPAs can actually go about selecting the right partners and then actually coming up with some sort of cooperation. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And then last but not least, the last couple of minutes, I'll talk about how we can collaborate together, because that's always an issue and always a question that comes up. So I thought this time I might as well just put it on slides just to sort of, have that covered. So you might have seen the introductory film that we posted on your learning platform, which is just 2 minutes. If you haven't seen it, have a look. It's just 2 minutes explaining what GIZ is and what GIZ does on the ground. In a nutshell, just for the purposes of this webinar, GIZ is an organization, or as it says here, a public benefit federal enterprise. Anyway, it's an organization owned by the German government. It implements technical assistance projects, really, for the German government, as well as other organizations or donors, but mainly the German government. We work with partners in more than 1,600 ongoing projects. So partners can be investment promotion agencies such as yourselves, but a whole host of other partners, because of course we work in a whole range of areas, from economic development, which is what we're talking about here, to education, to health, to water, what have you. In about 120 countries. That sort of, changes from time to time. Now let's get closer to the issue of what we're sort of discussing now, which is investments. And when we look at investments, and it was really interesting actually hearing some of the inputs at the beginning around, the quantity of investments, how can we increase the FDI inflows, etc., but also the quality of investments. And that's really key for us. We don't just want to focus on the quantity of investment, but also the quality. And this is sort of what Angela highlighted, I think, for Namibia, where you want to concentrate more on the quality of investment. What are the sort of jobs that are being generated? What is the impact on the environment? What are the impact on the sort of social structures and vulnerable groups and so on and so forth? So we've tried to focus on the quantity as well as the quality. And there is a whole host of tools, let's use that word, that we have within our arsenal to help our partner countries increase and enhance the quantity as well as the quality of investments, whether that's the macro environment, that's a lot of working with ministries of trade, ministries of economics on investment policies, again, the sort of thing that Angela mentioned and that also Laban mentioned for Kenya that you're working on with your Investment Promotion Act. This is exactly the sort of thing that we often work on with partner governments. On the meso level, sort of, intermediaries, we work a lot with investment promotion agencies. So you can see investment promotion agencies are really a key part of our puzzle in terms of, enhancing the quantity and quality of investments in our partner countries. We also partly work on the micro level in terms of supporting individual businesses, whether that's international businesses or small businesses. It comes with all the issues that Alejandro mentioned at the beginning in terms of Chile, all the issues that you have if you support a particular company, we have that 1,000-fold, There are ways and means around that, there are ways you can do that in a smart way. You can focus on what are the specific issues of that investor, whether that's, for example, training, they don't have the right trained people in a particular country, then that is something that we can work on and just generally work on vocational training within a particular country that isn't then just to the benefit of that particular business, but to other businesses as well. So there are ways that you can deal and support businesses that are not exclusive to that, and you just don't get into those, some of the issues that Alejandro mentioned. I think that's different for your work, but in terms of our work, that's sort of what, how I would sort of categorize it. And then again, zooming further into our work with investment promotion agencies, I try to sort of plot for this webinar on a map where we work with investment promotion agencies on the ground. So you can see it's a variety of places. The emphasis is on Africa. Quite a lot of work we do as GIZ is in Africa, but you can see Moldova and Europe, Mongolia and Asia, and the Caribbean, though that's a little bit more export focused, working with the Caribbean investment promotion agencies there. I noted down some of the areas that we work in with particular agencies. I'm not going to read it out in too much detail, but just to highlight a couple of points. So you can see with Tunisia, we're working with investment promotion agencies on preparing manuals for their staff, M&E system, identifying the right target sectors, some of the things that Crispin mentioned, that you try to sort of be a little bit strategic and look at which sectors are particularly interesting for you and where you need as well international expertise. So that's key, and that's what we're sort of working on with that investment promotion agencies, communication strategies, also developing partnerships with German associations, if that's what the Tunisian IPA wants to do, attract German investors. I was also asked to reflect a little bit on COVID-19 and how COVID-19 has changed some of this. And I think one of the areas that COVID-19 really had an impact on is, of course, the whole move towards digital ways of communicating, providing information to businesses in particular. And that's something we're working on with the IPA around making or showing to businesses what are the support measures that they can access to deal with the impact of COVID-19, as well as organizing webinars and so on and so forth. With Ghana, the cooperation is just starting. It's around strengthening their business development division. In a nutshell, what they want to do is develop bankable investment projects that they can then approach investors with and say, would like, to see whether that's of interest to the investors. So that's something we're working with them on. Setting up a CRM system, as well as a platform to link SMEs within the country, within Ghana, to international investors. Moldova, we're doing similar sort of work around setting up a CRM system and an SME linkages platform, as well as setting up a regional investment promotion agency. So with regional, I mean sub-national, because obviously it's not just about national IPAs. In many countries, you have sub-national IPAs as well. In Germany, you have that as well. As well as setting up a database for possible investment sites. I think someone is unmuted. So I think you might want to just mute yourself, Donnie.
Patricia, could you
here it
please
is,
mute?
okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, digital business matchmaking events, that has also become more important in the context of COVID. For example, we ran, or the colleagues in Moldova ran several matchmaking events with investors in Japan. And to dive a little bit further, even further into one of the corporations, my colleague Bellaccio will now take over for this particular part of the presentation and will introduce himself and then talk about our cooperation with Ethiopia. Bellaccio.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Can everybody hear me?
We
Can you
can.
hear me, Stefan?
Yes, we
Okay,
hear you
good.
very well.
Thank you so much. My name is Balacho, as introduced by Stefan. I worked as the head of one of the IPAS in Africa, which is Ethiopian Investment Promotion Investment Commission. Now I work for GIZ. Just to deep dive based on what my colleague Stefan has just highlighted, I'll be touching on Ethiopia in a more specific manner with 4 slides. And as it has been like in the news many times, Ethiopia has branded itself as emerging manufacturing hub in Africa. And with that frame, a lot has been done in terms of restructuring the institution, particularly the Investment Promotion Agency, to make it a kind of IPA plus because of the added mandates that it was given to develop policy, including actually the Investment Promotion Proclamation. It was reissued recently. I think it will be a very important document to look at for some of the countries who are looking at coming up with a revised version, including Kenya, which I heard. So it has a mandate in policy development and also regulatory role on industrial infrastructure, which are developed and operated by government-owned and also private institutions like the Industrial Parks Development Corporation, as well as the Land Bank and Development Corporation. Both report directly to the Commission. Of course, this is apart from its traditional role of promoting investment. They do it in a very focused manner in terms of sectors, country level, and even they zoom in into a company level target. And GIZ has been supporting the IPA in almost all the competencies of the Commission. For example, it is our implementing partner when it comes to the special initiatives for jobs, which has 3 interrelated components, one being supporting the local capabilities development, directly working closely with SMEs, and sustainability of the clusters and also the parks, which are somewhere around 15 of them, which are currently operational. And of course, generating investment leads, focusing on Europe, which is a component I am leading from Germany. So these are, of course, one of the intervention areas that I wanted to highlight. Just again, like zooming in to a particular activity, for instance, we currently are working with the IPA. We are supporting the Commission to develop sectoral analysis of the automotive sector. Not only that, due to lack of the required skills, when a company comes to a new country, the most difficult thing is also like to find the required skill set. So for the automotive specialized skills are lacking, and with that regard, we are supporting the IPA to accelerate the skills development endeavor. And of course, mainly generating leads for investment, focusing on big brands like Volkswagen, Nissan, BMW, and others. Thank you, Stefan. With regard to cooperation, with regard to COVID, and also what particularly the IPA is doing, they've been doing regular online surveys to understand the impact that COVID has on the investors, and also gathering feedback based on those surveys to support any government intervention that is going to happen as a response to the pandemic. They also assist investors in finding new suppliers, because new suppliers and also buyers actually, because they are rebranding or restructuring their productions into looking at new types of products suitable to the time, like PPEs. They also use a weekly newsletter and social media channels to inform investors on new initiatives and also the trend about the pandemic. Stefan, can I go to the next slide, please? I'm going to highlight two projects that we are working with the IPA at the moment, and also, of course, the Ethiopian government broadly. One being the bamboo bed production with the objective of supporting the government and also the IPA in addressing the spike in the positive cases of COVID-19. This project is meant actually to produce quicker and cheaper bamboo beds with 100% locally sourced inputs. In terms of a longer term impact, these are going to be used or supplied in a subsidized pricing to workers who are working in the various industrial parks. And the second is, of course, face mask production. The objective of this intervention has been how to retain textile workers. There are about 95,000 workers who were exclusively working on textile. And the idea has been how can we retain their employment? For the first phase, supporting 12,000 workers with the task of producing and free distribution of face masks using, again, inputs supplied by the project. This is a very important and strategic intervention in terms of our project. We also, of course, look at possibility of finding new buyers of excess production of the face masks. Can I go to the next and hopefully the final slide? Leveraging also my experience working as a commissioner of this Ethiopian Investment Commission and understanding what are needed in terms of effective partnership with investment promotion agencies. I would like to highlight one of the most important things, which is, of course, how can we combine? This is a constant question that should be asked on both sides. How can we combine development aid or development work or related resources with commercial reality of the private sector? To be specific, for instance, there are a number of pension funds, there are a number of venture capitals, there are a number of course, private equity finances available somewhere, trying to find viable investment. How can we be the bridge in bringing the demand and supply together is an idea. I think that is important to answer. And then, of course, the de-risking of investment is very important. Like I said earlier, a company, when it looks at a new country, what it will have to assess, apart from many other parameters, would be what are the skill set available. And in that regard, development partners could chip in and try to address the training component by supporting skills development initiatives. Sustainability is another important agenda, both in terms of social sustainability and environmental sustainability. For example, GIZ now is supporting in many areas with regard to, for instance, one of the parks, biggest parks, perhaps in African standard, in Sub-Saharan Africa standard, in Hawassa Industrial Park, effectively managing and efficiently utilizing the water treatment plant. So that is an important environmental sustainability agenda that could be looked into for partnership. Facilitation both in pre and post-investment processes is another area. And then finally, of course, it's very useful to look at how to partner in institutional strengthening interventions. Effective investment promotion agency is an important tool, of course, to attract investment. How can we institutionalize and also capacitate the IPA is an area where we've been really working aggressively. We now, for example, developed a program called Young Professionals Development Program, working closely with the Ministry of Trade and Industry to embed experts specialized in various areas so that they can upscale the service delivery capacities of the ministry and other institutions that have contact with the private sector. These are the areas I wanted to highlight. Over to you, Stefan. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Balache, for that. I will now switch gear a little bit and talk. And by the way, I've seen the question. Thank you, Dulce and Mana. I'll come to those questions in the fourth part of the presentation. And I just want to highlight a little bit, sort of more generally, sort of moving away a little bit from GIZ around how investment promotion agencies can work with international partners, how you want to sort of go about doing that, selecting the right partners and so on and so forth. What I wanted to highlight and what I will be, drawing a little bit, some of that expertise from is a publication that we're putting out in a couple of weeks' time together with WIPA. It's called IPA Toolbox, a practical guide to support investment promotion agencies. We started this about a year ago. Really, the idea was to help our colleagues on the ground, GIZ staff in countries, work with investment promotion agencies, collect some of the knowledge that we have gathered and others have gathered, etc. But because we thought actually it's really useful for others to have access to that as well, we now made that, or we will be making that public for everyone to sort of have a look, because I think it's actually quite useful as well for investment promotion agencies themselves. You can see it has several modules, one around investment promotion, module B, investment facilitation, module C, aftercare and advocacy. The one I want to sort of highlight is module F, exploring opportunities for cooperation with strategic partners. So you get a little bit of a sneak preview into this. Still, sort of, it's not final, but it's close to final. Now, this webinar series, or the webinar today, is about the international level, but just to sort of highlight, at least on one slide, that of course the partners you can work with are on the national level, on the sub-national level, as well as the international level. The international level isn't of course all there is. And you can, of course, subdivide it again. For example, here, as you can see here, public institutions, chambers and associations, and further partners. And here for the international levels, the one we've sort of highlighted here, but of course there are gazillions, yeah, but these are just some that we highlight here, which are embassies, the embassies, in particular of the markets that you're targeting, where you want to get investment from. The investment promotion agencies from neighboring countries, and from the target markets. So it might be the IPA of Germany if you're interested in attracting German manufacturers, for example, or the ones from neighboring countries. So if you think, you're in a very small country and the value proposition that you can make to investors is fairly small, then you might want to team up, or you might be doing that anyway already with neighboring countries to be able to effectively combine your offer and have a joint value proposition to investors. And then there's, of course, international organizations, and that's sort of, GIZ and others, and that's sort of what my first part was about. Chambers, associations, there's of course WIPA, where you can get all sorts of information and support, such as this webinar series. Regional associations, chambers and associations in target markets, and I'll talk about that in a second as well as, of course, then headquarters of existing investors and other stakeholders. Now, because there's so many, it's helpful to be a little bit strategic about who you actually want to partner up with. And that's really what I sort of, I think the main message I'm trying to get across for this webinar. It's not rocket science what I'm presenting, but very often it's not being done that way. So really, first you should look at what is actually your strategy. And often that's already derived from an economic policy strategy that the government has put forward, that they want to, support a particular sector with investors from particular markets, etc. So then the question for you is, as an IPA, well, what does that mean for me in terms of which are the right partners then I need to partner up with? If I want to attract automobile manufacturers from Germany, well then, probably the chamber that looks after those people in Germany is the right partner for you. The next step is then to review the partner's needs and competencies. So what are their needs? Because you need to look at what's the mutual beneficial activities that you can get out of this. This needs to be a mutual beneficial exercise. Otherwise, you're not going to get very far. And often that benefit for them can be that they want to make sure their members can expand into other markets. The third part then is, you determine modes of cooperation. You look at, well, how can we cooperate? It mentions here staff secondments, but that might be more sort of, if you're partnering up with a subnational or a regional IPA, as a staff secondment might be might be an interesting way forward, but it could be cooperation agreements and matchmaking events, that sort of thing. And then the fourth step is the organization integration. So the modes of cooperation is between you and your partner. The organization integration is for you within your investment promotion agency. Who is, for example, the key account manager for that relationship? How are you going to cooperate with that partners? How are you going to set up your internal structures in a way that is conducive to you having a good conversation with that partners? And then you don't have lots of different IPA officers contacting the same partner, and that partner is like, oh my God, you know, get your act together. And that's really what this is getting your own house in order. What you can see below is just an example of how you can then categorize it. You know, you can see here, so for example, if you want to attract ICT industries in a particular country, then maybe the ICT industry association in that country is your key partner. And you look at what is their interest, and that again might be they want to make sure their member companies can expand internationally. You can look at areas of cooperation.
Sorry to interrupt, Stefan.
Yeah.
I would be pleased if you could slowly wrap up, just to make sure that we'll have enough time for Andreas as well. Thank you very much for your understanding. I will do that. We all enjoy the presentation.
Yeah,
but
that's
unfortunately the time is limited.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. So you can look at the rest of the slide here in your own time. It's basically what I just mentioned. And then there's sort of a few things that you can look at, what works and what doesn't, which we outline in the toolbox. I just highlight a couple of points. One is around regularly reviewing your partner network. I'll talk about that in a second again. Partnering up with IPAs in neighboring countries, developing partnership relationships step by step, and not jump in with a cooperation agreement on your first meeting. That's not going to go down particularly well. And then be clear who's responsible within your organization. Now for COVID-19, that will obviously again trigger this whole process that I just outlined. COVID-19 will change a few things. You know, there might be sectors that will now move closer to their markets. For example, there are certain countries who want to make sure pharmaceutical products are manufactured more closely to consumers in Western Europe and US and so on and so forth. All of that has impacts on the sort of sectors that you want to target, the markets you want to target. And your governments might already be thinking, is my economics policy still right? So that has implications for you then to look at, are my partners, the international partners that I'm cooperating with, are these still the right ones, or do I need to focus on different partners? So that's all I want to highlight. COVID-19 gives you a chance to review your partner network. And then just last but not least, how you can collaborate with us. And that's sort of picking up on the questions that Anna had and Dulce as well for Latin America and Egypt. The countries that I've just highlighted are the ones where you should already be in contact with GIZ. Then there are countries where that isn't currently the case. In most cases, there just won't be a relevant program that can provide support to you. But nevertheless, you can look at the website that I've outlined here, and you can look at whether you think there is a relevant program, and then you can get in touch with the person who's the contact person there. So for Egypt, for example, there is indeed a program which focuses a lot of small and medium enterprises and focuses a lot on industrial parks. So you can for sure get in contact with that program and see whether you can look at some sort of cooperation. There's a few links now for German associations and chambers. Lots of them have GIZ sort of seconded people. These are links, and you'll have the presentation afterwards. So you can click on the link, look at, is this an association that's of interest to you? Is it your country? Then you can just get in contact with those people. And last but not least, for those of you who are in the Africa, Caribbean, and Pacific region, you can also access short-term support. So this is consultancy, technical assistance up to 90 days. It's really short-term to solve a particular business and investment climate issue. So what you mentioned for Kenya, for example, you were Laban, I think it was, the Investment Promotion Act that you're working on. This is exactly the sort of thing where you could seek assistance through this process. So if this is of interest to you, and if you are from an ACP country, then you can access and you can send an email to the email address that you have below and seek support. And with that, I'm already at the end. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm not sure, I might have missed some questions, etc., but Ismail or maybe someone can sort of summarize them in case I've missed any.
Thank you so much, Stefan. Thank you very much, Belachev. Actually, this is a very comprehensive and very nice presentation. Actually, we are very much thankful to you on behalf of our members as well for the support that you've shown to IPAs. And I do believe that IPAs are getting even more stronger with those support. and are going to be able to provide better services to investors. And I would like to switch to the next speaker, if I may. I am going to accept the questions if we have enough time in the end of the session. And the next speaker is Andreas Dressler. Andreas, can you hear us?
Can hear you well.
Andreas Dressler is, in addition to be a good friend of ours, is a very experienced consultant. He's very much closely working with the IPAs as well as companies. And he's going to give us very, very interesting informations and very good examples directly from the ground, directly from the business, actually. He's going to share us the trends in corporate FDI and attracting investment in a changing environment. Andreas,
yeah,
the
if
floor
I
is
could
yours.
be host to enable my video, then you can see me too. Unless you don't want to see me, of course.
Actually, we do want to see you, Andreas. You just can turn on your, yes, here
So
you are.
Here I am, thank you.
Good to see you, and the nice reflection of the church of Berlin.
Great.
Huh?
Good to be here. So thank you very much to ILO and to WIPA for the invitation and the opportunity to participate today. We're really looking forward to it. I like very much the interactive format of this session and have really been enjoying the discussion that's been going on on the chat. So some really good ideas, and I like the exchange of information that's been happening among the participants. So I'm going to share my screen with you and walk you through the presentation, which you will also receive afterwards. So just 1 second, please. Incidentally, I do see a few familiar faces on the participant list, but in the meantime, I'll just introduce myself very quickly. So again, Andreas Dressler. I run a company called FDI Center based in Berlin, Germany. And we work with both companies and investment promotion agencies throughout the world on a range of things related to foreign direct investment. Our work is very practical. I would say it's hands-on work. We don't get, hello Dushyant, good to see you as well. We don't get involved in the policy issues. It's very much the day-to-day business of where do companies invest, how do they choose the best location, and how can IPAs win investments and help companies to set up. So I'm going to share the screen again and take you through the agenda for today. So what I'd like to do, really spend most of the time available talking about some of the trends we're seeing in investment. So I'm not talking about a macro level, but really on a corporate level, where are we seeing companies invest? What types of investment are we seeing? And then talk about what that means for investment promotion agencies. In other words, what are companies expecting now and in the foreseeable future from IPAs? And what does that mean for IPAs? How do IPAs have to respond to some of these changes? Let me start with the trends. And we've heard the number again today. We keep hearing the number, FDI is going to fall this year by 30 to 40%. Whatever the number is going to end up being, the reality is FDI has been hit significantly by what's happening. We see this in our own business, helping IPAs or working with companies on site selection. A lot of the companies we speak to have either put projects on hold, temporarily, indefinitely, or canceled them altogether. You don't hear a lot about the canceled ones because companies typically don't publicize that, but we're familiar with many, many companies who had investment plans, in some cases at a pretty advanced stage, and have just simply canceled those investments. The big reason for this is obviously COVID and the resulting economic crisis, but Crispin alluded to this earlier. FDI had been declining for quite some time, and there are other factors that combined with COVID are leading to this restraint, this decline in FDI. One is certainly the big insecurity surrounding US-China trade conflict, but also free trade agreements in other parts of the world that are somehow being revised, restructured, or simply ignored in some cases, which is creating some more insecurity for companies. We're seeing some geographical declines as well. So we're speaking to a lot of companies about investing in North America and in the US in particular. And more recently, in the last 2-3 months, almost all the companies we speak to have said we're waiting to see what will happen with the US election. And they're simply not pulling the trigger on US investments until they see the outcome of the election later this year. And hopefully that it will be a smooth process, whoever wins that election. So there are a combination of factors that are all contributing to one fact, and that fact is that most IPAs, in fact, all of the IPAs we're speaking to, have a significantly reduced project pipeline. So that's the bad news. I'd like to spend the rest of the presentation talking about the good news. And the good news is that even if FDI falls by 40% this year, the worst case scenario according to UNCTAD, there is still 60% left, right? So what is that 60%? Who's investing? The investments are out there. We're still busy. I know that most IPAs we're talking to have less projects, but they still have projects. They're announcing wins. So projects are out there and they can be found. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that and provide you some real examples. And the first category of projects that we are seeing that I'm sure you would have also experienced are projects related to COVID. So these are companies in sectors that have actually experienced a COVID-related boom. The obvious example here is obviously personal protection equipment. There was a mad scramble for that back in March, April, May. That stabilized in some parts of the world, but demand remains high. And in the last couple of weeks alone, we've seen announcements of new factories being built or actually being opened already for face masks and other PPE in places from Canada to Japan to other parts of the world. So that will continue. E-commerce, everybody's at home, everybody's been at home or is still at home. People are moving to buying things online. That has created strong demand for anything related to e-commerce, including logistics, particularly last mile logistics. In other words, not the big box logistics, putting things on trucks, but actually the most challenging part of the logistics, bringing them to people's homes, either in very densely populated urban areas or in less densely populated regional areas. It still remains a challenge to bring the product to people's homes. So big demand for creative logistics solutions and services. DIY products. Everybody's been at home and everybody's looked at their wall and looked at their garden and looked at their balcony and felt the need to improve it. And DIY products have been flying off the shelves, which also means that the companies making those products have been experiencing strong demand. There is strong demand in furniture. So anybody who's making, in some cases, simple furniture has been experiencing strong demand. Video conferencing, we've all moved to that. So the companies designing those tools, designing those systems are growing at a significant rate, as are the companies that are developing digital learning solutions. So as part of what we do at FDI Center is offer FDI training. All of our training, almost all, including the training we do with WIPA, has moved online. We have a client, a national IPA, that we've been delivering training for the last 7 years. It's always been face-to-face in different parts of the world for their international offices and in their country. We're in the process of redesigning that entire training program to move it to digital training. And it's more than just video conferencing. It's actually working with learning management system providers to entirely change the training experience. So obviously companies in that space that are designing digital learning solutions also experiencing strong demand and expanding very quickly. As people are at home, they're playing more games online. So companies developing digital games also experiencing a lot of growth. Digital payments, as people move away from cash, have been experiencing strong growth, and automation and robotics, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So here are some examples of sectors that almost unexpectedly grew, have experienced demand, have experienced sustained demand, and that is translating into real FDI projects, typically greenfield projects. So these are one-off effects to some degree. Some of these will remain, but these are things that are directly related to COVID. It's not a comprehensive list. There are other sectors on here that I've left out. What I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about, though, are other industries. Other trends that have existed for quite some time that are still generating projects. In fact, when I look at our pipeline of projects, when I look at the leads we're finding for clients, when I look at our site selection projects, almost all of them fit into these categories. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about each category, and I'm also going to provide you examples to show the types of projects that this is generating, and also to demonstrate that these projects or these trends can create opportunities for you wherever you might be in the world. The first one is sustainability, which is a very broad term that encompasses everything from renewable energy to recycling. This has been going on for a while, but it's been strengthened, I think, also by COVID. Same goes for digitalization, again, a very broad term, but we've come to realize how dependent we are on digital technology. And certainly the companies that are developing any aspect of that digital technology are benefiting and investing. Food and farming is experiencing a renaissance driven by technology, and I'll provide some examples of that. As is mobility. So the classical automotive sector right now, not doing very well at all, but new mobility doing very well. And this refers not just to cars, but and not just to electric mobility, but also new forms of mobility in flight, and also the maritime industry that are also generating projects. And finally, life sciences. So let me give you a few examples of the types of projects that we're seeing. Here's under the heading of sustainability, an example of a project announced pre-COVID, but it's a good example of something we're seeing in other parts of the world. This is recycling related. In this case, it's technologies that are being used to turn waste into fuel, primarily diesel fuel. And there are many companies around the world right now making these types of investments. They're pretty sizable. This company here is investing 50 million per plant in 5 separate plants in Indonesia. We're currently speaking to a company from the US that is also in this space, that is planning investments globally. Their investments are going to be $500 million each. And their biggest concern is, can we get our hands on enough waste? Those of you who work in this space know that waste is an issue around the world because it's increasing, but also because a lot of companies are no longer importing waste. So waste is piling up in some parts of the world, literally. And that creates a great opportunity for the companies who can turn the waste into something more useful. Another example in the renewable energy space is hydrogen. Several countries, Australia, Japan, Germany, in this case Portugal, have announced hydrogen initiatives in the last 6 months. Those are translating into very sizable greenfield projects. So these are just 2 examples under the umbrella of sustainability of real projects that we're seeing that are being implemented in different parts of the world. If we look at digitalization, one example here are data centers. So everything we do online, whether that's transfer information to colleagues, whether it's streaming music or films, whether it's posting something on social media, all of that requires a backbone of infrastructure, typically data centers. There has been already for years a rush to build data centers around the world. That has intensified in the last 6 months. And again, the opportunities here are global. This has typically been restricted to the US, North America, Europe. This has now become a global trend. Some examples here from Africa, where data centers so far have been restricted to South Africa. Amazon opening its first cloud data center in Africa, in South Africa earlier this year. But we're seeing examples, and we're talking to companies who are looking to other African companies to start developing and establishing a data center network. These are attractive investments. They may not create a lot of jobs, but in terms of the technology they bring and in terms of the infrastructure they help create, they're very interesting for companies wishing to move up the value chain. In the area of food and farming technology, again, we could spend hours talking about this. One area where we're seeing a lot of demand is vertical farming, which really means growing things close to consumers, often in places where it's difficult to grow things because climatic conditions don't permit. So here's a very recent example, a company from the UAE that is building a $30 million vertical farming facility in Kuwait, which is going to grow all kinds of fresh vegetables and crops to supply Kuwaiti consumers. And we're seeing these types of facilities being established pretty much everywhere in the world, and the companies in this industry gaining a lot of funding. In the agricultural technology space, literally dozens of new technologies that are being implemented around the world. Interesting example here from Australia in this case. It's an Israeli company called Taranis that has just raised around $50 million. And they're moving into Australia with a, best way to describe this is a drone-based technology that monitors large farms. What's interesting is how they're getting into the market, because they're partnering with another company called Adama, which used to be an Israeli company, but was bought a couple of years ago by Chinese investors. So here, in keeping with the topic of today's session, partnerships, very important, which is something I'll get to in a minute as well. In mobility, certainly all the interest is in electric mobility. And if you follow companies like Tesla, you'll see that sales continue to increase. Demand for electric vehicles is still going up. Other automotive makers are getting on board or have been getting on board. In the case of the big companies like Volkswagen, they are typically retooling existing plants and shifting production in those plants from traditional cars to electric cars. But what is interesting is that this example shows electric vehicle production doesn't need the type of very tightly knit integrated supply chain that combustion engine cars do. And we're seeing examples of companies setting up e-vehicle manufacturing plants like Hyundai, in this case in Singapore, in countries that actually don't have an automotive industry. So this creates an opportunity for countries that have tried to build automotive industries, maybe haven't succeeded to the degree possible, to build on that and try and focus on electric vehicles, because they don't have the same types of needs as the traditional automakers do. In life sciences, we worked on a project earlier this year for a large US biotech company to look for a location and site for a new gene therapy plant. There are at least 7 or 8 projects I'm aware of now. This is an announcement of one that's already been completed. Companies that are looking for locations for similar types of facilities. The driver here tends to be skills. So the locations that are being considered are actually very few and far between, because there are not that many locations around the world that have people with the relevant expertise for gene therapy manufacturing. But we're also seeing companies looking at production facilities or looking at locations for facilities for different parts of the pharma value chain. In this case, I know Dushyant is on the line from India. The Indian government, which has a very strong pharmaceutical sector, both in generics, but also in other types of pharma, has put in place an incentives package to encourage Indian companies to produce active pharmaceutical ingredients in India. And many European countries are looking to do the same, because there will be increasing investments in API manufacturing capacity. So I've kind of rushed through this because we don't have the time, but really I wanted to illustrate that there are projects, there are sizable projects out there, there is activity, and the projects fall into certain industries and are, with some exceptions, projects that are going to go to different parts of the world. And what I mean by that, there are opportunities here for everybody. So depending on your location strengths and target sectors, there are opportunities for you, whether you're based in Western Europe, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in Latin America, wherever you may be, these trends and developments are creating opportunities. A few more points on some of the trends we're seeing. One that I mentioned briefly earlier is automation. And one other thing that employers or companies have learned from COVID is that humans are a liability. We get ill, and when we get ill, we don't work. And when we work from home, we might not be as productive. So COVID has accelerated something that's been happening already for a long time, a boom in automation. People typically associate this with manufacturing, but it's not just manufacturing, it's across the board. It's fully automated logistics centers. It's fully automated customer service facilities. It's automation in areas like business process outsourcing. And it's automation in areas where it's been difficult to implement in the past, such as food processing or even meat packing or meat processing, all of which are industries that have experienced disruption due to COVID, where companies are investing a lot into automation. So this is typically bad news. It's bad news for locations because companies will create less jobs when they invest. And it also implies that in some cases, the availability of workforce, especially low-cost workforce, becomes less of an advantage. Because if you can fully automate your production facility, you don't have to locate it in a low-cost location. You can actually move it closer to where your consumers are, because you no longer have the need for large numbers of low-cost workers. So this is definitely a threat, and it's definitely a threat for developing countries particularly. However, and there is always a however, workforce costs still matter. So I've lived through 2 economic crises in the past. So the first one was the dot-com boom at the beginning of this century. The other one was the global financial crisis. In both cases, the reaction of companies that were struggling as a result after the initial shock was restructuring, and restructuring typically implies a need to reduce costs. So we are seeing already, and we will see increasingly, companies close facilities, particularly in high-cost locations, and in some cases move or relocate activities to lower-cost locations. So these trends might seem contradictory: automation on the one hand, relocations to low-cost locations on the other, but they're trends that are not mutually exclusive. They can move in parallel. So we are seeing companies, for example, here in Western Europe, who are doing exactly what they did 10 years ago when they started to struggle financially, look at low-cost locations in Eastern Europe and beyond that, that they can relocate production to because they need to cut costs. They may then introduce some automation, so that might be part of their strategy, but I wouldn't write off having low-cost labor as an advantage for the time being. Now, this was mentioned before, the nearshoring, reshoring. Again, we could spend hours talking about this. I've spoken to a lot of IPAs in the last few months who are really placing a lot of emphasis on this as something that will generate projects. This idea that companies will move production closer to home, or the idea that they're going to be companies flooding out of China, there'll be this massive exodus from China, and that companies will look for alternative locations, typically lower cost locations, to move their facilities to. Again, we could spend a lot of time talking about this. I'm not that optimistic. I think we will see some investments in this space. We will see some companies that are looking for an alternative to China in some cases. We will see some companies that, for good reasons, will want to manufacture closer to home or closer to where their customers are. But I don't think we're going to see a flood of investments in this space for many reasons, one of which is simply that supply chain realignments take time. These are not decisions that companies can make at the drop of a hat. It takes time for companies to change their supply chains, to change the way that they make and distribute products. And it's certainly going to take a lot of time for companies to move, if they really want to, from places like China with highly sophisticated, well-developed supply chains to other parts of the world that may not have those advantages. Now, I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about what investors are asking for. And again, this reflects our conversations with companies on a daily basis. So my team and I are speaking to literally dozens of companies from around the world daily about their plans. And one of the first questions they always ask is, why should we speak to you? Why should we speak to your IPA clients? Or if we're advising them on where to invest, these are the things they're saying that are important to them. And what they're saying is that the typical IPA services, providing information, organizing site visits, are fine. Those are helpful, but they're asking for more. And here are some of the things that they're asking for. One of the things they're asking for is enabling regulations. So if you look at some of the sectors we just talked about, a lot of those need regulations to even work. If you want to attract drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, you need regulations in place to make that happen. If you're trying to attract data centers, you need certain regulations about data security that have to be in place. So all of the investments we're seeing now, renewable energy is a good example, are typically driven by countries putting in place regulations that create the frameworks for those industries to thrive. So we're not just talking about broad FDI related regulations, but sector specific regulations. And companies are saying to us or to IPAs, help us put these regulations in place. Now, most IPAs are not typically empowered to do that. This is where a strong advocacy function plays a role, where IPAs have the authority and certainly the means of communication to channel that back to government to ensure that these regulations are there. Companies are looking for testing opportunities. Agricultural technology is a great example. They're looking for ways to show that their technology works in a real live environment. We're seeing some countries introduce smart farms where companies can put in place ag tech solutions and really prove their concept before they move to commercialization. Partnerships, again, the theme of today's session. Companies are asking for partners. Companies are asking for governments to partner with them in some of these investments. So the example I showed from Indonesia, one of the partners in that project is the government of the region in Indonesia where these investments are taking place. Companies are looking for governments to share risks. They're looking for partnerships with academia. They're looking for partnerships with SMEs or startups. They're looking for partnerships that will help them develop technologies and again, share risks for some of these projects that are still relatively new in terms of technology. A topic that was brought up as well in the previous presentation, workforce development. This is key. In fact, this has become for us the thing that companies ask for most, more important than traditional cash or tax incentives in some cases. Can you help us hire and particularly train a workforce that has the skills that we need? This is absolutely essential, and it's something that companies are asking for all the time. And then finally, flexibility. Are governments flexible? Can we go to a place where we can scale up quickly, but also if things go wrong, can we scale down flexibly? And are there systems in place that will help us navigate and manage future shocks and future crises and remain flexible? And I'd like to end with a couple of slides on IPAs. What does this mean for investment promotion agencies? And I know the majority of you here today are from IPAs. IPAs are under pressure, so there are fewer projects. I believe that most of you are probably under pressure to generate results from governments that are eager to announce good news and would like some announcements and some job creation headlines. At the same time, we're seeing governments play a much bigger role in investment promotion. So they might have previously had more of an arm's length relationship to the IPA. We're seeing governments introduce new policies. We're seeing governments really look at what the IPAs are doing. In some cases, we're seeing governments actually getting involved directly in investment promotion without even consulting with IPAs. And IPAs are facing operational restrictions. So you're not able to travel, you're not able to organize events, you're not able to fly to events. There are restrictions. Many of the IPAs we're talking to are facing budget cuts. So it's a challenging environment. And I'm going to end on this slide some of the things that we think IPAs should be doing or that we're seeing IPAs do that will help them succeed. One is to continuously demonstrate your value and your impact. Continuously communicate to stakeholders and to the public at large why you exist, what role you play, particularly in a crisis or in a recovery stage of the economy, how you can contribute to that. Something that I think Stefan said earlier, the need to contribute and to be more closely aligned to your government's economic policy. So not to pursue your own agenda, but to really support, if you're not doing that already, your government's economic development priorities. Aftercare was mentioned already. Aftercare has always been important. I think a lot of IPAs in the past have paid lip service to it. Now is really the time to not just retain the investors you have, but work with them to actually expand the scope of what they're doing, because it's easier and more practical to do that in some cases than to find new investment. At the same time, it's being open to different types of investment. Most IPAs that we're working with or that we see are still clinging on to this idea of greenfield investment. It's got to be greenfield, it's got to be physical, it's got to create X number of jobs. if that's your model, you're going to be missing out on opportunities where companies would rather come in through a partnership. They'd rather come in and test technology. They'd rather come in and buy a local company. And if you're not in a position to broaden your definition of FDI and to help them with those things, you will definitely miss out on opportunities. This also applies to developing new value propositions, new services. So beyond the services that you've been offering already, respond to some of those investor requirements that I mentioned before. And finally, it really is all about reviewing your operations and ensuring that you are as effective as you can be, that your teams are responsive as they can be, and that you're using new technologies and digital technologies as effectively as possible to find investors, to serve investors, to track investors, and really to make the best use of the opportunities that are out there. So I've really rushed through this. And,
thank you so much, Andreas.
Going
Sorry to interrupt.
But I did want to make sure that we stay within the timeline.
Thank you so much, Andreas. I see from the audience as well that your presentations are always very much expected. And I do see that we all have a lot of things to learn from your experiences and your presentations. And actually, I also noted out the company expectations and the implications for IPAs. They were very much interesting. And I do note as well that FDI is down, but not out, which means, of course, enthusiasm for all of us. We do hope that the days will come back. The days when we are going to welcome the investors to our countries and to do site visits with them next to each other. Thank you very much, Andreas. Until then, we will have to cooperate. We will have to collaborate. I mean, we are going to work together to find out the best ways to react to the current situation and to be able to find out the ways to better serve to investors and to increase the investments ever more than before. I'm going to finalize slowly because I see that we have less than 2 minutes now. I'm going to hand over to Carl slowly because I see that unfortunately we don't have enough time for the Q&A session. I see that many of our colleagues, they are asking to be contacted with the participants. I do like you to get in touch with them through our discussion forum and through eCampus in order to let all of us to learn from the experiences and from the questions. And I do encourage as well our speakers to be actively, let's say, being present at the eCampus, at the discussion forums. And I do want to thank you again to Andreas, to Stefan, as well as to Belace for their invaluable contribution. And I'm handing over to Carl. Carl, you are still muted. Great.
I'm now, yes. Thank you also, Ismail, for the sharp moderating from your side. Excellent. Also, thanks from my side to Andreas, Felix, Bechalu, and Crispin. I think we covered a very wide spectrum of in terms of investment promotions, from trade discussions to WTO to really concrete investors' expectations. So thanks a lot for all these contributions. Like Ismail said, don't let the discussion stop here, and for specific questions or advice, please continue the discussion on the discussion forum on the eCampus. I think if you have specific questions, don't hesitate to post it there. By this time, I also would like to indicate some of the discussion questions that came from this masterclass concerning the collaborative approach and the partnerships, maybe the role that WIPA can play in being a matchmaker between IPAs and different development agencies, development banks, business associations. The topic of new areas for investment, I think Andreas was rightfully right in pointing out the different sectors. It's not out. It's not. There is still a lot of new projects that are present. We just have to capture the opportunity and then expectations by investors. Now, let me close here then this fourth masterclass by indicating by inviting you to next week's masterclass number 5. And we have lined up 5 IPAs that presented very exciting presentations for next week's class. We will have IDI talking about the Ireland experience on linkages and aftercare. You will see that a lot of the presentations are actually focusing on that element of aftercare and linkages. The same goes for trade, KwaZulu-Natal Trade and Investment. They also will talk about IPAs and linkages, and especially focusing on the issue of competitiveness and productivity within South Africa. Apex Brazil will talk about their digital transformation, and Pro Colombia will talk about responsible investment practices for sustainable development. So these are the different topics that we will be discussing in next week's masterclass, which, as indicated, will be completely driven and run by the different investment promotion agencies. So everybody, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Ismail, for being with us. And thanks again to all the presenters for their contribution. And we see each other next week.
Have a great week and goodbye.
Thank you. It was a really good session today.